welcome to the deep dive. Today we are taking on, well, it's a topic that seems to always spark debate, doesn't it?
It really does.
Science and faith. The relationship between them, it's so often framed as just this constant war.
Yeah, that's the dominant narrative, the conflict thesis. It's loud, definitely, but it's not the whole story.
Right. So our goal today, our mission for this deep dive, is to kind of step back from that simple battle narrative.
Exactly. We want to explore the whole spectrum of how they interact. We've looked at sources showing everything from, clashes, but also like philosophical independence, real dialogue, even deep integration sometimes.
It sounds like a really complex tapestry woven from history, philosophy, personal beliefs.
It absolutely is.
Okay, so let's start right there. Before we even get into the history,
Sure.
What is it fundamentally about science and faith that makes them, clash? Sometimes it feels like they should be talking about totally different realms.
Well, at their core, they often function as different systems of authority, wouldn't you say?
How so?
Science, it relies on empiricism, observation, reason, testing, and crucially, falsifiability.
Meaning you have to be able to prove it wrong, theoretically.
Exactly. Its ultimate authority is basically the natural world itself and scientific conclusions. They're always provisional, always subject to change with new evidence.
Okay, provisional. But faith often deals in absolutes, right? Eternal truths from revelation, scripture, tradition. The authority there feels very different, often seen as transcendent, maybe?
Precisely, and that's the tension point. You have one system with provisional conclusions based on nature, and another often presenting eternal truths based on transcendence.
So the friction happens when they try to make claims about the same thing, like the origin of the universe, maybe, or life.
That's exactly it. When both science and religion try to answer the same how or when questions about the physical world, say the age of the earth or how life arose, that's where you see the sparks fly. That's where the historical clashes really kick off.
Okay, let's dive into that history then. Because those clashes are why this whole science versus religion idea is so persistent. We probably have to start with the big one, Galileo.
Yeah, Galileo in 1633. It's the textbook case, really.
What was the core issue there? Wasn't it just about whether the Earth went around the sun?
On the surface, yes. But it was deeper. The church at the time endorsed a geocentric and earth-centered model, partly because, well, it seemed to align with a literal reading of certain scriptures.
Like Psalm 93 saying the world is firmly established, it cannot be moved.
Exactly like that. So when Galileo came along with his telescope, providing evidence for Copernicus's sun-centered system, it wasn't just a minor astronomical correction.
It felt like a demotion for humanity, taking us out of the center of everything.
A huge demotion. It challenged that sense of Earth and therefore humanity being the absolute physical center of God's creation, a massive challenge to our perceived special place in the cosmos.
Okay, so that's the heavens. What came next? Where did the conflict move?
Well, fast forward a bit into the 18th and 19th centuries. The challenge shifts from the sky down to the Earth itself. Deep time.
Geology.
Geologists like James Hutton, Charles Lyell, they started looking closely at rocks, at erosion, at sedimentation.
And they saw processes that must have taken a really long time.
An incredibly long time. They found evidence that the Earth wasn't just thousands of years old, but millions, perhaps much older, shaped by these slow, gradual, observable processes.
Which would directly contradict
The timeline you'd get from a very literal reading of Genesis, especially calculations like Bishop Ussher's famous 4004 BCE for creation. Suddenly, the biblical timescale seemed tiny compared to Earth's actual history.
So first the cosmos, then the age of our own planet.
Yeah.
But the really big one, the one that maybe hit closest to home for people's identity, that had to be Darwin, right? 1859.
Oh, absolutely. On the origin of species, evolution by natural selection. This was different.
How so? Wasn't it just another scientific theory?
It was. But Darwin provided a mechanism, natural selection, that could explain the incredible diversity of life without needing a specific moment-by-moment divine intervention for every single species.
So complexity could arise naturally through these understandable laws.
That was the implication. Life could diversify and adapt over vast stretches of time driven by environmental pressures and inheritance.
And the part that really shook people,
Us.
humans.
Yes. The inescapable conclusion was that humans weren't a separate special creation outside of this process. We shared a common ancestor with other animals, including apes.
Which directly challenged the Genesis narrative of humans being uniquely created in the image of God. That must have been profoundly unsettling for many.
It caused immense upheaval. You had the challenge to human exceptionalism, the challenge to literal scripture, the challenge to the idea of a constantly intervening designer. It hit on multiple fronts.
And yet, despite these massive historical clashes, Galileo, geology, Darwin faith didn't just disappear. People found ways to navigate this.
Exactly. The conflict narrative is real, fueled by these events, but it isn't the only story. Persistence is key. These clashes forced a kind of negotiation, a search for ways these two powerful ways of understanding the world could coexist.
So let's pivot there. We've seen the battle lines. Now let's look at the peace treaties, the frameworks that allow billions of people to hold both science and faith.
Yeah, the models for reconciliation or coexistence. Probably the most famous starting point is Stephen Jay Gould's idea.
NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria.
That's the one, NOMA. Gould argued that science and religion have fundamentally separate domains of teaching authority, magisteria.
Okay, break that down. What are their separate jobs, according to NOMA?
Science's magisterium, its domain, deals with the empirical realm, what the universe is made of facts and how it works, theories, the stuff you can measure and test.
And religion's job?
Religion's magisterium deals with questions of ultimate meaning, moral value, purpose. Why are we here? How should we live? What's right and wrong?
So under NOMA, if you read Genesis, you shouldn't read it like a science textbook trying to explain cosmology.
Exactly. Gould would say Genesis is a profound theological text answering the why questions. Why creation? Why humanity? Not a scientific text answering the how or when.
So if they stick to their own questions, they can't conflict.
That's the core idea. They rule separate, non-overlapping kingdoms of inquiry. Science tells us the age of the rocks. Religion tells us what to do with the rocks. Maybe build an altar, maybe build a home.
There's a certain elegance to that. Keep them separate, and the problem disappears.
It is elegant. And Gould argued it's necessary. Science can sort of purify religion from error and superstition. Think about understanding disease. Science shows its germs, not demons, right?
Right. Reduces the need for supernatural explanations for everyday events.
But conversely, religion or ethics provides the framework for what we should do. Science can tell us how to split the atom, but it can't tell us whether we should build a bomb. That's a moral question, outside science's magisterium.
Okay, I see the appeal, but does NOMA hold up perfectly? What about areas where science creates new ethical dilemmas, like CRISPR gene editing or advanced AI?
That's a really sharp critique of strict NOMA.
Science gives us the ability to edit genes, but doesn't that immediately force a conversation with ethics and morality, the traditional domain of religion, about the should?
Absolutely. These areas seem to demand dialogue, not just separation. If the magisteria are strictly non-overlapping, how do you handle these crucial conversations where science and values intersect?
So NOMA might be too clean, too separate for the real world sometimes.
It can be, and that pushes us beyond just independence towards models that allow for, dialogue or even deeper integration between science and faith.
Which leads us to probably the most common integration model we see today.
I think so, especially within many mainstream Christian denominations and other faiths too. Theistic evolution.
Okay, what's the core idea of theistic evolution?
Basically, it fully accepts the scientific consensus. The Big Bang, the ancient Earth, the evolution of life, including humans, all of it.
But where does God fit in then?
God is seen as the ultimate creator and sustainer, the one who established the natural laws of the universe in the first place. God works through these natural processes, including evolution, to bring about creation and achieve divine purposes.
So God isn't constantly stepping in to, zap new species into existence.
Right. It's more like God set up the conditions, the laws of physics, the potential for life, and allowed the universe and life to unfold through these processes. It's a God who works with and through nature, not constantly against it or outside it.
And you see support for this at high levels.
Oh, definitely. Think of Pope Francis explicitly stating that evolution in nature is not inconsistent with the notion of creation, because evolution presupposes the creation of beings that then evolve. It's a very common view in Catholicism, Anglicanism, many Methodist, Lutheran traditions, and others.
And for this to work, people have to approach their sacred texts a bit differently, right? You can't really hold to theistic evolution and a super literal reading of Genesis day by day.
That's crucial. Reinterpretation is key. Believers using this model tend to view ancient texts like Genesis as using the language, the metaphors, the cosmology of their own time to convey deeper spiritual truths, not literal scientific facts.
So the days in Genesis.
They're often seen metaphorically, maybe as long epochs or ages or phases in God's creative work, rather than literal 24-hour periods. This allows the theological meaning to remain powerful while aligning with the vast timescales science has revealed.
Okay, so we have these models, Noma for separation, theistic evolution for integration. But how does this play out globally? Because the science versus faith fight feels very Western sometimes, maybe American.
It does have a particular flavor in different cultures. We mentioned the Catholic Church post-Galileo. They've largely embraced science. They run the Vatican Observatory, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. It's quite integrated.
But Protestantism seems much more varied.
Extremely varied. You have many mainline Protestant denominations that are perfectly comfortable with theistic evolution. But then, yes, especially in the United States, you have very visible and vocal movements like young Earth creationism.
The YEC folks who insist the Earth is only, 6,000 to 10,000 years old, based on a literal reading.
Exactly. And also the intelligent design movement, which argues that some biological complexity is too intricate to have arisen by evolution alone and must point to a designer. These groups are where the public conflict narrative is often loudest.
Okay, shifting away from Christianity for a moment, what about other Abrahamic faiths? Islam, for instance. There was the Islamic Golden Age.
A crucial point. During the Islamic Golden Age, roughly 8th to 14th centuries, science flourished. Studying the natural world was often seen as a way of appreciating God's creation. It wasn't inherently seen as conflict.
And today?
Today, it's varied, like Protestantism. There are creationist viewpoints in the Muslim world, certainly, but many Islamic scholars work towards reconciliation, emphasizing metaphorical interpretations of the Quran and pointing to verses they believe might hint at things like the expansion of the universe or gradual creation long before science discovered them.
Interesting. And Judaism?
Judaism has a very long and rich tradition of engaging with reason and philosophy alongside faith. Think of Maimonides back in the Middle Ages trying to harmonize Aristotelian philosophy with Jewish scripture.
So less literalism generally?
Generally, yes. Most denominations today, Reform, Conservative, even much of modern Orthodoxy, view the Torah primarily as a source of moral guidance, law, and historical identity, not as a scientific textbook. So they tend to find much less conflict with modern cosmology or biology.
Okay, let's broaden out even more. Eastern traditions. Hinduism, for example. Does the conflict look different there?
Often, yes. Consider Hinduism. Its traditional cosmologies often involve absolutely vast timescales. We're talking about yugas, cycles of creation and destruction lasting millions or even billions of years.
Which sounds actually pretty compatible with modern scientific dating.
Exactly. The sheer scale of time in Hindu cosmology means there's often much less inherent friction with the idea of an ancient universe or Earth compared to traditions with shorter, more literal timelines. The conflict just doesn't land the same way.
And Buddhism, you hear people say it's almost like a science itself sometimes.
There's definitely a strong resonance. Buddhism places a huge emphasis on empirical investigation, observing your own mind, understanding the nature of reality through direct experience and reason.
Less focus on a creator god or divine revelation.
Much less, especially in core teachings. And the Dalai Lama has made some really striking statements over the years. He basically said that if science were to conclusively disprove a fundamental Buddhist belief, Buddhism would have to change.
Wow. That's a remarkable stance. Willingness to update based on evidence?
It really highlights a tradition that prioritizes understanding reality as it is, which aligns very closely with the scientific spirit, even if the methods, meditation versus telescopes, are different.
Okay, we've covered religious perspectives from conflict to harmony. But to be balanced, we have to look at this from the other side. The view from the secular standpoint, people who don't hold religious beliefs. How do they see this relationship?
Right. From the perspective of many atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, the reconciliation models often don't really hold water. They tend to see the conflict as more fundamental, maybe even inevitable.
This is where figures like Richard Dawkins come in, the new atheist movement.
Exactly. Thinkers like Dawkins argue that science and religion are fundamentally incompatible because their approaches to knowledge are just antithetical.
How do they define faith in that context?
Often as belief without evidence, or even belief in spite of evidence to the contrary. And from that perspective, faith is seen as the polar opposite of the scientific method, which demands evidence, testing, skepticism, and revision.
So for them, it's not about finding harmony, it's about recognizing that one approach is based on reason and evidence and the other isn't.
That's the core argument. They see it as a zero-sum game for intellectual credibility. Science delivers verifiable results, while faith, in their view, relies on assertions that can't be tested or proven false.
And they often use the God of the gaps argument to make their case, right? Can you explain that one again?
Sure. The idea is simple. Historically, people often invoked God to explain things they didn't understand. What causes lightning? God. Why is the human eye so complex? God did it. Where did life come from? God.
These were the gaps in scientific knowledge.
Precisely. But as science progresses, it finds natural, testable explanations for these phenomena. We understand meteorology, we understand the evolution of the eye, we have theories about abiogenesis.
So the gaps where you might need God to explain the natural world get smaller and smaller.
Exactly. The argument is that God becomes an increasingly unnecessary hypothesis for explaining how the universe works. Science fills the gaps, leaving less and less room or need for a supernatural explanation of physical reality.
And from this viewpoint, science isn't just a tool, it can be part of a complete worldview.
For many secular humanists, yes. Science provides the best understanding of reality, and when combined with humanist philosophy emphasizing reason, empathy, human well-being, it offers a complete framework for both understanding the cosmos and living ethically within it.
They find awe and wonder in the universe, revealed by science itself.
Absolutely. The grandeur of the cosmos, the complexity of evolution, the beauty of natural laws, these can inspire a profound sense of awe, meaning, and connection, all without recourse to the supernatural. Their ought comes from human values and reason, not divine command.
It's important to understand that perspective clearly, too. It's not just denial. It's often an alternative, positive worldview.
Definitely. It's a different foundation for meaning and morality.
So, wrapping this all up, we've gone from fierce historical clashes to models of peaceful coexistence, like Noma and theistic evolution, explored global perspectives, and heard the critiques from a secular standpoint. What's the big takeaway for you, the listener?
I think the main thing is to see it as a spectrum. It's not just science versus faith. It's conflict, yes, but also independence, noma, dialogue, and integration, theistic evolution.
And where any specific interaction falls on that spectrum really depends on the specific claims being made, right? Literal interpretations are more likely to clash.
Exactly. It depends entirely on the interpretations and the claims on both sides. For many people, there isn't a deep conflict in their daily lives or intellectual framework. They might see science as explaining the how and their faith providing the why, the meaning, the moral compass.
You could almost say science purifies religion from error about the natural world.
And perhaps religion or ethics provides the framework for meaning and purpose that science, by its nature, cannot. Both can be seen as profound quests for understanding our place in the universe, just using different tools and asking slightly different questions.
Okay, before we finish, we always like to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to chew on that builds on what we've discussed.
And this one relates directly back to that historical tension and potential synthesis. We talked a lot about the Big Bang Theory. It's the cornerstone of modern cosmology. The idea the universe began from this incredibly hot, dense state about 13.8 billion years ago.
Right, the standard scientific model.
But here's the often overlooked historical twist. Who first proposed the core idea of an expanding universe originating from a single point, what he called the primeval atom?
I'm guessing not who people might think.
Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian physicist and mathematician who was also a Catholic priest.
Wow. So the Big Bang Theory was actually proposed by a man of faith.
Yes. And even more ironically, the theory initially faced resistance not just from some religious literalists, but also from some prominent secular scientists at the time. Fred Hoyle, famously, was skeptical and coined the term Big Bang somewhat dismissively because he felt it sounded too much like a moment of creation, too. Theological.
That's fascinating. So you had some atheists resisting it because it sounded like Genesis, and some religious folks resisting it because it contradicted a literal Genesis timeline. Lemaitre was caught in the middle.
In a way, yes. So the final thought is this. Does the fact that the foundational theory of modern cosmology originated with a Catholic priest fundamentally challenge that ingrained narrative of inevitable conflict between science and faith?
Or does it simply demonstrate that it's entirely possible for individuals, at least, to hold both domains not just separately, but in a deep, productive dialogue, leading to profound insights about the universe?
Exactly. Is Lemaitre the exception that proves the rule, or does he point towards a more integrated possibility, something to ponder?